One of the most puzzling aspects of this whole, it really is kind of a national tragedy. It's a tragedy for the FBI, certainly, as we look back and see the thin basis for launching an investigation like this. When you juxtapose the reasons that the FBI stated in their opening communication for starting up a case, and then their comments to the Inspector General later as to why they felt they were compelled to investigate the Trump campaign, they don't add up with a certain logic that should have been applied to the dossier and its connection to the Clinton campaign. If they applied the same logic to the dossier and the fact that the Clinton campaign arranged for and paid for that and received Russian disinformation, then they would have had to open up a separate counterintelligence investigation, and yet they didn't.
And quite honestly, close down the Trump investigation.
Well,
because it was predicated on all that false information.
It was predicated not only on thin information of fourth-hand hearsay, it also, the statements that they relied on contained two exculpatory statements that, A, there was no indication that the Trump campaign received or accepted the Russian suggestion that they had information damaging to Hillary Clinton, and B, the Russians were prepared to release it no matter what the Trump campaign did or not. That is in their own opening EC. That right there for an experienced counterintelligence leader in the FBI should have been enough to say, we don't have enough to open up a case. This was a hijacking of the FBI, given respect to the Inspector General's conclusion of no bias. It's clear that there was bias involved by the text messages that were written by Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. It's clear by the statements made by former Director Comey and Deputy Director McCabe. They held a personal animus toward the president. There's no dispute on that. So this investigation was clearly a malicious undertaking.
James Comey said in his September 30th testimony before Judiciary that he was proud of the work done by Crossfire Hurricane. That was the investigation on President Trump, at that time Canada Trump. And for the most part, it was done by the book, was his word. And I think for a lot of us, we were most shocked by his two words, proud of it, and it was by the book. Would you agree with either of those statements?
Well, I wouldn't be proud of Crossfire Hurricane. I'm proud of FBI agents, but no, this was not done by the book, not even remotely. We keep saying it over and over again. The FBI cannot walk outside the door without articulating adequate predication to be able to interview a U.S. citizen. And we should all be concerned and vigilant that the FBI adheres to those policy guidelines. And in this case, they did not. It would be startling to me that an FBI director and deputy director would treat a FISA application against a presidential campaign in a nonchalant way. I would assume that they, or at least their chief of staff, the chief counsel, would read it word by word and inform them to the deepest degree possible as to the nature and applicability of the FISA. If it was a normal FISA on a suspected intelligence officer of the FSB, that's one thing, fairly routine, fairly pro forma. But that's not what we're talking about here. So that it stretches credulity that they would wave it off as well. We just signed off on it as kind of in a rubber stamp manner. That just is hard to fathom. I don't think the court was strong enough, frankly, in its condemnation of this activity. The director's own words, Director Comey's own words, that the dossier was salacious and unverified, and then 2 times after uttering those words, he signed off on a FISA application that was, by the FBI's own admission, by their own admission, dependent on that dossier for the probable cause. So it's difficult to square what their thinking was and why they went forward like this, other than there was an ulterior motive there somewhere. And I want to be clear here because obviously I'm taking a different position than what the Inspector General wrote in his report. But if you read that carefully, he interviewed Crossfire Hurricane team members, and all of them spoke about the necessity of investigating Russian interference with the election. Nobody disputes that. That is clearly an FBI responsibility. Russia always tries to interfere with elections and other parts of our government activities. Nobody is disputing that. Crossfire Hurricane was a case that was opened against U.S. citizens and members of a presidential campaign. Unprecedented. Never been done before. You would think it would be handled with care, marked all over that decision-making process, but it doesn't appear that way. So they literally took fourth-hand information. The FBI received information from a friendly foreign government, which we now know to be Australia, who in turn had a conversation with George Papadopoulos, who in turn received information now known through Joseph Mifsud that the Russians had suggested they had information damaging to the Clinton campaign. I'm not sure how you rally all of that together to make sufficient predication for opening even a preliminary investigation, a limited investigation. They went ahead and opened a full investigation, which gave them the ability to use all of the FBI's investigative powers against U.S. citizens. And as I pointed out earlier, not only were they relying on fourth-hand hearsay, embedded in those statements by the Australian diplomat were two exculpatory statements that should have stopped the show right then, but didn't.